Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving headfirst into an ancient royal tragedy that, believe it or not, holds some incredibly profound psychological lessons for our modern lives. We're going to explore a story from ancient India that literally has it all. We're talking dark prophecies, the ultimate betrayal, and a desperate, desperate search for redemption. So let's jump right into this fascinating historical account and uncover what it can teach us today.
We're starting with what is essentially a gripping, historical true crime mystery. Can a usurper, someone who committed the absolute ultimate sin, ever actually find redemption? Just imagine having it all. Unimaginable wealth, unchecked authority, the highest throne in the entire land. But your mind is an inescapable prison. Well, that is exactly where our subject found himself. It begs the question, how do you escape a prison built entirely out of your own guilt?
Section 1. The Usurper's Son.
Our story kicks off in the ancient kingdom of Magadha. Long before he ever took the throne, a dark prophecy cast a massive shadow over the young prince. The timeline of King Ajatashatru's early life reads exactly like a Shakespearean tragedy. Before he was even born, prophets warned that he was destined to kill his father, King Bimbisara. Fast forward a bit, and fueled by intense paranoia and some really terrible advice from a rebellious monk named Devadatta, Ajatashatru actually does it. He overthrows his father. But the turning point on this timeline is just absolutely heartbreaking. Right around the time his father is suffering in prison, Ajatashatru's own son is born. Holding his newborn child, he is hit by this sudden, overwhelming wave of paternal love. He turns to his mother and asks, "Did my father ever love me like this?" And his mother reveals a story. When Ajatashatru was a baby, he had this incredibly painful pus-filled infection on his finger. His father loved him so much that he literally sucked the infection out himself just to soothe his baby's pain. Hearing this, the new king's heart completely shatters with remorse. But tragically, it's too late.
To really grasp the depth of his crime, you have to look at the horrifying conditions he created. Driven by sheer, blinding paranoia to protect his stolen throne, Ajatashatru locked his father up in a massive 3,600 square meter prison camp. But actually, it's worse than that. He confined the old king to a tiny claustrophobic inner cell measuring just 2 by 4 meters. That is practically a closet. He banned everyone from visiting, with the sole exception of the queen. Desperate to keep her husband alive, the queen went to extremes. She secretly smeared a mixture of honey and flour all over her own body before visiting, basically smuggling in just enough sustenance to keep the old king from immediately starving to death. And when Ajatashatru found out about this, he ruthlessly banned her from visiting too.
Section 2. The Obsession of Power. With his father eventually dead from the torture and starvation, you'd probably expect the new king to feel triumphant, right? His rival is gone. But the reality was a complete psychological nightmare. Just look at the profound irony here. Let's contrast these two kings for a second. On one side, you have the imprisoned father, King Bimbisara. Physically, he is trapped in a tiny box, starving to death. Yet, mentally, he is entirely at peace. He spends his time meditating and actively forgiving his son. On the flip side, we have the ruling son, Ajatashatru. He is physically free. He commands a vast, wealthy empire. Yet he is completely trapped in his own mind, suffering from severe insomnia and absolutely crippling paranoia. It goes to show you, true imprisonment really does happen in the mind.
The new king's psychological torment became completely unbearable. He couldn't sleep, he was constantly haunted by delusions and trapped in a massive existential crisis. Desperate for any kind of relief, the king consulted 6 of the most famous spiritual teachers in the entire region. But they offered him nothing but empty reassurances. A lot of them tried to comfort him by claiming that karma simply didn't exist, telling him his actions had no ultimate cosmic consequence. But deep down, the king knew better. These philosophical cop-outs completely failed to cure his deep-rooted, agonizing guilt.
Part 3. Answers from Vulture Peak.
At this point, the king is completely exhausted and practically on the brink of madness. Finally, his half-brother, the royal physician Jivaka, convinces him to seek out the Buddha at a place called Vulture Peak, and the journey there is incredibly cinematic. As the king and his entourage approach the peak in the dead of night, they enter this dense, dark forest. Now, Jivaka had told him there were 1,250 monks meditating there, but it was completely, perfectly silent. You could hear the bugs buzzing, but not a single human voice, not even a cough. This absolute chilling silence made the paranoid king break out in a cold sweat. He literally grabbed his sword, terrified he was walking straight into a trap. He asks Jivaka, "Are you ambushing me?" He just couldn't fathom that over 1,000 people could sit together in such total, uninterrupted peace. While instead of an ambush, he found the Buddha, And the Buddha didn't even wait for the king to figure out how to ask his heavy burden questions. He immediately outlined the Samannaphala Sutta. He laid out this highly practical three-step roadmap for inner peace. First, morality, or gi, setting firm ethical boundaries to protect your mind from future regret. Second, concentration, din, finding inner peace and stillness away from all those external pressures. And third, wisdom, tway, seeing reality, your actions and their consequences with absolute clarity. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't some abstract, magical thinking. It was a grounded psychological framework designed to rebuild a broken mind. And honestly, these principles are incredibly relevant for us today when we're trying to escape our own high-pressure rat race.
This beautifully simple approach fundamentally shifted the king's entire perspective. The teachings brought him sharply back to the present moment. Now, obviously, he couldn't change the horror of what he had done to his father in the past, but by focusing on mindfulness and genuinely committing to a moral life moving forward, he found a real pathway to profound peace and clarity right there in the present. He truly became a changed man, and later, a great patron of his people.
Moving on to Part 4, Bodhisattva or Sinner.
Now, what is absolutely fascinating here is how different historical texts and spiritual traditions interpret the king's ultimate legacy. Looking at the sources impartially, we see two remarkably divergent takes on King Ajatashatru's life. The historical Theravada texts view him pretty straightforwardly. He's a tragic, repentant sinner. In this view, the heavy karma for murdering his father actually blocked him from achieving full enlightenment in that lifetime, despite how deeply he repented. However, the esoteric Mahayana traditions offer a radically different take. They suggest he was actually a bodhisattva, an enlightened being, who intentionally manifested this terrible tragedy for a much higher purpose.
This brilliantly illustrates how different traditions find deep meaning in tragedy. In the Mahayana perspective, Ajatashatru's seemingly evil actions were actually a massive, dramatic setup. By creating a situation of inescapable suffering for his mother, the queen, he prompted her to cry out to the Buddha for a way out of this miserable world. And that very request is exactly what led the Buddha to preach the Amittairayana Sutra, the meditation on the Pure Land. So, according to this tradition, by playing the ultimate villain, the king intentionally helped open up a path of salvation for even the absolute worst of sinners in the future. Pretty mind-blowing, right?
Finally, Part 5, The Lessons of Karma. Regardless of which historical or theological interpretation you lean towards, his life stands as this epic, terrifying demonstration of karma and the cyclical nature of our actions. The texts trace this astonishing karmic chain reaction across multiple generations. It actually started years earlier, when King Bimbisara unjustly caused the death of a sage. That sage, driven by a dying thought of vengeance, reincarnated as Prince Ajatashatru. The prince then fulfills his revenge through patricide. But here's the key. The cycle finally breaks when the king experiences genuine, deep remorse, changes his entire life, and eventually becomes a vital supporter of the First Buddhist Council, helping preserve 84,000 relics of the Buddha. The vicious cycle of violence is finally transformed into a cycle of preservation and wisdom.
And this brings us to the Buddha's ultimate message to the tormented king, and honestly to all of us. Translated directly from the source text, it says, "Use love to transform hatred. Always be compassionate, generous, tolerant, and forgiving." The Buddha told the king point blank that the dead cannot be brought back, and endless, paralyzing guilt serves absolutely no one. True transformation, truly breaking our own karmic chains, only happens when we actively choose to use love to overcome the hatred inside us.
Even more powerfully, let's look back to the father for a moment. Despite suffering starvation and brutal torture at the hands of his own flesh and blood, King Bimbisara held zero hatred in his heart. The records show that his dying wish was simply for his son's success. He prayed that his son would become a wise ruler and asked that all their karmic debts be closed forever. That level of absolute, unconditional forgiveness is what truly shattered their cycle of vengeance once and for all.
We want to leave you with this final thought to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. Look at the sheer extremes of this history. If such profound darkness, a king who committed the absolute worst of crimes imaginable, can be transformed into a life of wisdom, peace, and historical contribution, well, what's stopping us? How might we apply that same radical forgiveness to the grievances in our own lives? And maybe more importantly, how can we learn to finally forgive ourselves? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable history with us today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will see you in the next explainer.